I never thought the moment would come like this. Quiet, unplanned, and with no warning. The room was dim, only the orange hue of the lamp casting a soft glow over the hardwood floor. I had just come back from the community center, where I'd been volunteering for the LGBTQ History Week preparations. The stories I'd heard there, so many of them hidden, erased, silenced, had stirred something in me. I had always known who I was, deep down, but for decades I buried it under layers of expectation, shame, and fear. And now, standing there in my own home, my son standing at the doorway, looking at me with wide, questioning eyes, I couldn't hide anymore. I didn't want to doubt he wasn't supposed to be home. Not that early. The plan was to change out of the pin on my jacket, the rainbow triangle, subtle but meaningful, before he saw. But I forgot. Maybe I didn't care enough to remember. Maybe something inside me wanted this. For years I had lived half a life, pretending. Married to his mother for over a decade before we separated quietly, with no drama, no accusations. We called it growing apart, which wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the full truth either. I had grown distant because I couldn't live honestly. And when she noticed, I think she knew. She never asked, never demanded an explanation. She just let me go. With grace, I'll never stop being grateful for. So now, here I was. My son, 19, college student, standing there watching me as I pulled the stack of old flyers and posters from my bag. He didn't speak. Neither did I. Time stretched awkwardly between us. I looked at him, then looked away, my heart pounding harder than it had in years. My mouth felt dry, but my chest felt warm. I wasn't scared the way I used to be. I wasn't trembling or wishing to disappear into the floor. Instead, I stood up straighter, even though my legs felt like air. "Hey," I said, like nothing was different. Like we were still two people having a normal day. But everything was different now, wasn't it? He looked at the pin on my jacket. "What's that?" he asked. His voice wasn't angry. Just curious. Almost cautious. I looked down at it, then back at him. "It's for the history project at the center," I said, then paused. I could have stopped there. Let it hang, let the lie dangle between us. But I didn't. For some reason, I didn't flinch. "It's mine," I said quietly. "It's a part of me." He blinked, then furrowed his brows. "Wait, what do you mean?" I took a breath. My palms were sweaty now, but I still didn't look away. "I'm gay," I said. "I've known for a long time. I just never said it." He didn't move. Didn't even blink for a few seconds. He stared at me like he was trying to put together pieces of a puzzle he didn't know existed. "You?" he asked. "But, I mean, you were married to Mom." I nodded. "Yeah, I was. And I loved her. Just not the way I was supposed to. I didn't even know how to accept it then. I was afraid of how people would look at me, how it would affect you. I didn't want to lose you or confuse you. So I hid it." He sat down on the armrest of the couch, still trying to make sense of everything. I could see his thoughts racing. And I didn't rush him. I let the silence sit, because it wasn't just silence, it was time. Time he needed. Time I owed him. After a long pause, he looked up. "So all this time, you've been pretending?" I shook my head slowly. "No. Not pretending. Just surviving. Trying to be a good dad, a responsible man. But I wasn't whole. I wasn't really myself. And I'm tired of hiding." His lips tightened. I saw something shift in his eyes. Maybe confusion. Maybe a little bit of betrayal. But also, something softer. Something like understanding. "I wish you told me earlier," he said, his voice quieter now. I know, I said. I wish I had too. Another pause. I waited again. I could hear the clock ticking behind us. My heart beat loud against my ribs, but I didn't move. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. So, the center. You work with other people like you? I nodded. Yeah. People who've lived in silence. Some who came out in their 70s. Some who never did. People who fought just to be seen. Their stories, they made me realize I don't want to end up like that. I want to be honest with the people I love. He stared at the floor for a moment, then finally looked back at me. I'm not mad. Just surprised. I get that, I said. I mean, it's weird. But not bad. Just new. A faint smile tugged at my lips. That's all I need. Just time. And for you to know that nothing else has changed. I'm still your dad. I still love you the same. He looked at me then, really looked. And I saw it. The moment something inside him softened. The moment he let go of the shock, at least a little. He nodded. Just once. But that nod meant everything, and in that moment I didn't feel shame. I didn't feel fear. For the first time in my life, I felt free, because I was finally seen. And I knew, somehow, this was just the beginning. The next morning felt different, though everything around me looked the same. The sun filtered through the blinds the way it always did, soft and golden, catching on the dust in the air. The coffee brewed with its familiar hiss, the old radio hummed in the background, and yet something in the air had shifted. My son came down the stairs slowly, his hair still messy from sleep, and for a second I felt that same nervous tension rise in my chest. But he didn't avoid me. He didn't look away. He just gave a small nod and walked to the kitchen, grabbing a mug from the cabinet like it was any other day. That meant something. We sat in silence, sipping coffee. It wasn't awkward, but it wasn't exactly comfortable either. It was something in between, an unspoken agreement to take things slowly. I watched him out of the corner of my eye, wondering what he was thinking, what questions might still be circling in his mind. I didn't want to push him. I wanted him to come to me when he was ready. He finally spoke. So, do you like someone? His voice was steady, but there was a hesitation in it, like he wasn't sure if he should even ask. I chuckled lightly, setting my cup down. No, not right now. It's not really about that. I think, for me, it's more about being okay with who I am, whether I'm with someone or not. He nodded slowly, still processing. You've always been so quiet. Like private. I never thought you were hiding anything, though. I was hiding from myself more than anyone, I said. When I was your age, things weren't the way they are now. Being out wasn't safe, not in our town, not in our family. I was scared of what people would say, what they'd do. I didn't want to be rejected. But you were strong, he said, surprising me. You raised me alone after the divorce. You always showed up. You were solid. I tried to be, I said softly. But I wasn't always whole. And I hate that I didn't let you see that side of me. I wanted to protect you from my own pain. He looked at me then, really looked, and I could see the weight of what I just said settling in his mind. He was trying to reconcile the father he knew with the man I was revealing to him now. I knew it would take time. And I was okay with that. Later that day, I went to the community center again. This time, something was different in how I walked through those doors. I wasn't sneaking around, wasn't watching my back. I was there because I wanted to be. I belonged there, finally. One of the older men, Robert, smiled when he saw me and clapped me on the shoulder. You look lighter, he said. Did something happen? My son knows, I told him. And I didn't hide. I didn't feel ashamed. Robert's face lit up. That's everything, he said. That's the moment. That's when the healing really begins. And I believed him. Because something had cracked open inside me, something I'd kept sealed tight for decades. At the meeting that day, we shared stories of firsts, first crushes, first heartbreaks, first moments of pride. Some of the men had never said a word to their children. Others had been rejected. A few had been embraced, but it was always complicated. Always layered. Hearing them speak reminded me that I wasn't alone in this journey. I wasn't the first father to come out late. And I wouldn't be the last. When I got home, my son was in the living room, scrolling on his phone. He looked up and asked, "What do you guys talk about at that place?" "Life," I said. "Stories. Regret. Hope. Mostly, we try to remember that we're still human, that we still matter." He nodded. "I think it's cool that you're helping people like that." I sat down across from him. "It's helping me too." He looked thoughtful for a moment. I looked some stuff up. About, older people coming out. There was this one article about a dad who came out at 60, and his kids never forgave him. I don't want to be like that. His words caught me off guard. I felt my throat tighten. "You don't have to worry about that," I said. "You're already doing more than I could have hoped for." He shrugged. "I'm still figuring it out. It's just new, like I said. And I'm proud of you for even trying," I said, my voice thick with emotion. He looked away, embarrassed maybe, but I saw his mouth twitch with a half smile. "So, if you ever do meet someone, would you tell me?" I paused, the question heavier than it seemed. "Yes," I said honestly. "I would. If it mattered. If they mattered." He nodded again. And this time the silence between us wasn't tense. It was warm, filled with the kind of understanding that only comes when two people stop pretending. I knew we weren't fully there yet. But we were moving. And that was more than I ever thought possible. It had been a week since that first conversation, and in some ways, things felt surprisingly normal. My son still came and went as he always had, still left dirty dishes in the sink and hogged the bathroom in the morning. But now, every small moment between us felt different, more open, more real. There were pauses in our conversations that held curiosity instead of silence. We were beginning to speak to each other not just as father and son, but as two men who were both trying to understand the world and each other a little better. One night, we sat on the couch, flipping through a documentary about the Stonewall riots. He had found it on his own. That alone stunned me. He didn't say much at first, just stared at the screen, eyes glued to the images of men being dragged by police, women shouting, crowds pushing back. I watched him more than the screen. I watched the way his face changed with every scene, sometimes confused, sometimes angry, sometimes shocked. When it ended, he didn't speak right away. He sat there, arms crossed, legs bouncing a little. "I didn't know it was that bad," he finally said. "I knew people fought for rights, but I didn't get how brutal it was." I nodded slowly. "That's the part we weren't taught. It's history, but it's also trauma. It's part of why people like me stayed quiet for so long. We learned early that being honest could cost everything." He looked at me, his expression softer now. "Did anything like that ever happen to you?" I hesitated. The memories were old, but the sting of them still lived in my bones. Not like Stonewall. But there were moments. High school was rough. I remember walking down the hall once and someone shoved me hard into the lockers. I didn't even know who it was. I wasn't out. But they sensed something. It scared me. After that, I worked harder to hide it. Did you ever tell Mom? He asked, more gently now. No, I said quietly. I didn't even admit it to myself back then. I told myself I could live a normal life if I just buried it deep enough. He looked at me for a long moment. That sounds lonely. It was the simplest sentence, but it cracked something inside me. I felt the tears come before I could stop them, welling in the corners of my eyes, not from pain, but from the relief of being understood. I nodded. It was. For a long time. He didn't panic, didn't change the subject, didn't pretend not to notice. He just sat there with me. That silence, heavy with emotion, wrapped itself around the room like a blanket. And in that moment, I realized that healing wasn't loud or fast. Sometimes it was just sitting next to someone who cared enough to listen. The next day, I found him sitting at the dining table with a notebook open. He looked up when I walked in. I'm writing an essay, he said, for my sociology class. It's about identity and generational shifts. I was thinking maybe I could write about you. I paused. The idea of being part of his schoolwork, his story, his learning, was something I never imagined. Only if you're comfortable with it, I said. He shrugged. I think it's important. You're part of something bigger. You lived through a different time. I want people to understand that. There was a lump in my throat again. I didn't expect him to care about my story this much. I didn't expect it to matter to anyone outside of me. But here he was, choosing to carry it forward. Choosing to let it teach him something. As the week went on, we found more ways to talk, to connect. He asked questions I never thought he'd be brave enough to ask. Some of them made me laugh. Some of them made me pause before answering. Like when he asked, "So, what was your first crush like?" I grinned at that. You really want to know? Yeah, he said, almost sheepish. I mean, if you're okay telling me. So I told him. About the boy named Aaron in my biology class, the one with the crooked smile and the raspy voice. About how I never spoke to him, just sat 2 rows behind and imagined what it would be like to have someone like that notice me. I told him how I hated myself for those feelings back then. How I prayed they'd go away. He listened with quiet focus, then said, That sucks. No one should feel ashamed for who they like. I know, I said. But shame was the only language I had back then. We both sat with that for a while. And even though the past still hurt, telling him made it feel a little less heavy. A little less sharp. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how different things had become. I wasn't living in the shadows anymore. I wasn't holding my breath in my own home. My son knew me now, not just the version I presented, but the whole truth. And slowly, with every word, every pause, every moment we sat in silence together, that truth was starting to feel like something worth celebrating. Not hiding. It was a Sunday afternoon when I heard the doorbell ring. I wasn't expecting anyone, but when I opened it, there stood Carla, my ex-wife. We had kept things civil after the divorce, occasionally checking in about our son, birthdays, holidays. But unannounced visits weren't our usual way. She held a tray of cookies in her hands, her smile tight but familiar. Heard you've been busy at the center, she said. Thought I'd stop by. I stepped aside, motioning her in, feeling a strange knot tighten in my stomach. I hadn't told her. Not really. Not in words. She had her suspicions, I'm sure. But I had never said the words out loud to her either. Until now, I hadn't had the courage. She sat at the table, fingers tapping lightly on the edge of the tray. I made tea, trying to calm the wave of nerves creeping up my spine. My son wasn't home, so there was no buffer, no casual excuse to change the subject. just her and me and the weight of years of silence. "You seem lighter," she said after a while, looking at me closely. "There's something different about you." I exhaled slowly and sat across from her. "There's something I need to tell you," I said, my voice steady but soft. "It's something I should have said a long time ago." Her eyes didn't blink, didn't shift away. She waited. "I'm gay," I said. "I've always known. I just buried it. And I'm sorry I never told you." There was a beat of silence, a beat so long it felt like time stopped. Then she set her cup down and sighed. "I knew," she said. "Or at least I suspected. There were moments. But I didn't want to force it out of you. I figured you'd tell me if and when you were ready." Her voice wasn't cold. It wasn't angry. It was sad, but not surprised. "Why didn't you trust me?" she asked. That question stung more than anything else she could have said. I looked at her, eyes heavy with guilt. "I didn't even trust myself. I thought I could be someone else, live the life everyone expected. You didn't do anything wrong. I just wasn't ready to be me." She looked down, nodding slowly. "I guess I always wondered why I never really got all of you. I thought maybe it was me. Maybe I wasn't enough." "No," I said quickly, firmly. "You were more than enough. You were kind and patient and strong. I loved you. I still do, just not in the way you deserved." She wiped at her eyes, but she smiled. "I'm glad you finally said it. I'm glad you're being honest. I wish it had come sooner, but I'm proud of you." Her words loosened something tight inside me. I hadn't realized how much I needed her forgiveness, her understanding. We talked for hours after that, about the past, about the future, about our son. She told me how proud she was of how he was handling everything, how open he was becoming. "You raised a good one," she said. "He's strong like you. And he's learning how to love without conditions." That evening, when my son came home and saw his mother sitting in the living room, he froze for a second. "Hey," he said, glancing between us. "Everything okay?" I smiled. "Yeah. We talked." He looked at her, searching her face. "And you're good with it?" She stood up and hugged him tightly. "I'm better than good," she said. "Your dad's finally being who he is. That's worth celebrating." Watching them embrace, I felt a kind of peace I hadn't known before. It was like watching pieces of my life finally find where they belong. For so long, I feared I had broken my family by hiding. But now I was seeing something else. Healing didn't always mean going back to what was. Sometimes it meant creating something new out of the truth. Later that night, my son sat beside me on the porch. The sky was painted with stars, the air cool and calm. "You know," he said, "I was worried when you told me. Not because you're gay, but because I thought maybe I never really knew you." "I worried about that too," I admitted. "That maybe I'd be too different, too distant. But you're not," he said. "You're just more you now. And that's kind of awesome." I smiled at that, the simple beauty of his words sinking deep into my chest. We sat there in silence for a while, watching the stars, listening to the world breathe. There was no need to speak. Everything that needed to be said was already hanging gently between us. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged exactly where I was. It was a regular Tuesday when the email arrived, just a short message from the community center director asking if I'd be willing to share my story at the upcoming LGBTQ history event. At first, I stared at the screen, unsure whether to reply. My heart thudded in my chest, louder than it should have for such a simple question. I had spoken my truth to my son, to my ex-wife, to the small circle at the center, but this was different. This meant standing in front of strangers, some who might understand, some who might judge. I closed my laptop without answering, trying to shake the feeling. But it lingered all day, pulling at me like a thread I couldn't ignore. That evening, I mentioned it to my son while we were cleaning up dinner. They asked if I'd speak at the history event. I said casually, stacking dishes. He looked up, curious. Are you going to do it? I shrugged. I don't know. I'm not sure anyone wants to hear from a guy who came out at 52. He leaned against the counter, arms folded. I think people would care. I mean, I care. Your story isn't small just because it came late. His words hit harder than I expected. There was something about hearing them from him, so direct, so simple, that made the doubt in my chest shrink just a little. I stayed up late that night thinking about what I would even say if I agreed. What parts to include? What to leave out? Would I tell them about Aaron, the boy in biology class? About my marriage, the years I spent trying to be someone I wasn't? Would I talk about the loneliness that came with silence, or the quiet power of finally being seen? The next morning, I opened the laptop and replied with a single sentence. Yes, I'll speak. The reply came quickly, full of gratitude and details. I had 2 weeks to prepare. The pressure started building immediately, but it wasn't fear. It was something else. Anticipation. A strange kind of nervous excitement. My son noticed the shift in me as the days went by. You've been pacing a lot, he said one night. You working on your speech? I nodded, trying to figure out how to say everything without saying too much. He smirked. Maybe just say what you told me. That was enough. I worked on the speech in quiet moments. Early in the morning before the world woke up, late at night when the house was still. I wrote it like a letter, not a speech. I didn't want to sound like a hero or a victim. I just wanted to be real. Honest. I started with the truth. I was a father. I was a husband. And I was gay. I had hidden from myself for most of my life, not because I was weak, but because I was scared. Scared of losing my family, my community, my son. And then I would talk about the moment it all changed, the day I chose not to hide anymore. When the day finally arrived, my hands were shaking as I put on my shirt. My son walked into my room, looked me over, and gave a small thumbs up. You look good, he said. Like someone who's about to do something big. I smiled, but the nerves were loud in my chest. As we drove to the center, the silence in the car was thick, but not uncomfortable. He reached over and turned down the radio. No matter what happens, he said, I'm proud of you. Just for getting up there. I nodded, the words catching in my throat. The community center was buzzing with people when we arrived. Some were familiar faces, others I'd never seen before. I took my seat near the front, listening to the speakers before me. Stories of resilience, of young people fighting for change, of elders who marched, who lost everything, who found strength in each other. Every word added weight to the moment I was walking into. And then they called my name. The room quieted as I stepped up. My hands gripped the paper I had printed, but my voice was steady when I spoke. I told them everything. Not just the facts, but the feelings. The silence I lived in, the guilt I carried, the love I never gave myself permission to feel. I told them about my son, the way he looked at me when he found out, the questions he asked, the understanding he gave. I told them that coming out didn't make me less of a father, it made me more of one. Because honesty, I said, is a kind of love too. By the time I finished, the room was still. No applause right away, just a pause that felt like everyone was holding their breath. And then, quietly, people began to clap. Not loudly. Not like a performance. but with respect. With connection. My son stood in the back, his eyes glassy. I caught his gaze, and for a moment, it was just us in the room. Just a father and a son who had walked through something together, and come out the other side stronger. That night, we didn't say much on the ride home. The street lights blurred through the windows, casting soft shadows across the dashboard. He finally spoke as we pulled into the driveway. "You were amazing," he said. "I didn't know you had all that in you." I laughed gently. "Neither did I." And we sat there for a moment longer, letting the quiet wrap around us. Letting the truth settle in like it had always belonged there. The days that followed the event felt lighter, like something heavy had been lifted from my chest. There were still moments of uncertainty, moments where I questioned whether I had said too much or too little, but those doubts faded every time someone approached me, whether at the center, at the grocery store, or even just walking through the park, to say they had heard me speak and that it meant something to them. Strangers with quiet smiles. A woman who lost her brother to silence and shame. A young man who hadn't yet come out to his parents but said my story gave him hope that maybe he could. It humbled me in a way I hadn't expected. I had spent so many years believing my truth was a burden. Now it was becoming something else, something that could hold space for others. One evening, while we were sitting on the couch watching TV, my son looked over at me. "I was thinking," he said, "maybe you could do more of that. You know, talking. Sharing. Maybe start a podcast or something." I chuckled at the thought. "Me? A podcast? I don't even know how to edit a voicemail." He grinned. "That's what I'm here for. I could help you. I think people would listen." I looked at him, really looked, and saw not just the pride in his face but the belief. For so long, I had avoided being seen. Now he was encouraging me to be heard. It was overwhelming in the best way. The next day, we sat at the kitchen table with his laptop between us. He pulled up programs, showed me how microphones worked, explained how episodes were structured. It felt foreign and thrilling all at once. We brainstormed ideas for what I might talk about: older queer stories, coming out late in life, fatherhood, forgiveness. "You could call it Still Becoming or something like that," he said. "Because you're still figuring it out, and so are the people listening." I nodded slowly. That name stuck with me. Later that week, I recorded a short intro. Just a few minutes of me speaking into the mic, sharing who I was and why I was doing this. My voice shook a little at first, but the more I spoke, the easier it became. I talked about shame, about how it hides in plain sight. I talked about love, the kind we give others so freely, and the kind we often forget to give ourselves. When I finished, I looked at my son. "What do you think?" He smiled wide. "I think it's perfect. Honest. Like you?" That weekend, we uploaded the first episode. No expectations. No big launch. Just a quiet beginning. And yet, within days, messages started to come in. Emails. Comments. Stories. People who had waited years to speak. People who were still waiting. And one message in particular caught my breath. It was from a man named James, who said he was 63 and still hadn't come out. He wrote, "Your story made me feel less alone. I'm not ready yet, but I'm closer than I've ever been." I read that line over and over again. Not ready yet, but closer. It echoed in my chest like a heartbeat. That night, I told my son about the message. He sat back and smiled. "See? You're doing something that matters." I nodded slowly. "It just feels strange, you know? I was silent for so long. Now people are listening." He looked at me, his tone more serious. "That's why it matters. Because they know you've lived it. You're not just talking. You understand." As the weeks passed, the podcast grew. Not huge, not viral, but steady. The messages kept coming. I started inviting guests, other late bloomers, quiet fighters, people who had seen darkness and still found light. Each episode was a reminder that it's never too late to choose truth. Never too late to begin again. One day, I received an invitation to speak at a nearby university for a panel on generational perspectives in LGBTQ experiences. When I told my son, he grinned like he'd won something. "You've become a whole movement," he teased. I laughed, brushing it off, but deep down, I felt it too. I was becoming something I never thought possible, a voice for others, a mirror for the parts of themselves they tried to hide. But even with all this growth, there were still quiet moments when I questioned things. In the quiet of night, lying in bed, I'd sometimes wonder if I was doing enough. If being honest now made up for all the years I stayed silent. One night, unable to sleep, I sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket. My son came out, wordless, and sat beside me. After a while, he spoke. "You ever feel guilty?" I glanced at him, surprised. "All the time," I said. "For not being braver sooner. For the years I spent pretending." He nodded. "I think about that sometimes. But then I remember, if you hadn't gone through all that, I wouldn't be who I am. You protected me even while you were hiding. That matters too." His words hit deep. I looked at him, the young man he had become, and I realized something I hadn't before. My silence wasn't just fear. It was love, too. Misguided maybe, but real. And now, that same love was giving me the strength to finally be myself. We sat there until the stars began to fade, the air growing colder around us. No words left to say. Just the quiet understanding between us, something sacred and unspoken. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't wonder who I was anymore. I just let myself be. The invitation to the university panel sat folded in my jacket pocket for days before I finally accepted. I kept rereading it like it might change the more I looked at it. They wanted me to speak alongside others from different age groups about how coming out has evolved across generations. I felt honored, but I also felt like I was stepping into something I wasn't quite ready for. Imposter syndrome, maybe? Or maybe it was just the years of habit. Keeping quiet, staying small. But when I told my son I was thinking of turning it down, he gave me that look, the one he gives when he knows I'm trying to shrink from something important. "You can't back out now," he said. "You've already inspired so many people. Why stop now?" And just like that I said yes. The day of the panel arrived and the campus buzzed with energy. Students filled the lecture hall. Some with rainbow pins, others just curious. I sat at the end of the panel table, next to a young woman who looked barely out of high school and an older gentleman who came out in the 80s and lost nearly everything for it. We were a strange trio, but as the discussion began, I realized that our stories were parts of the same thread, woven through time, shaped by culture, fear, hope, and courage. When it was my turn to speak, I felt that old tightness in my chest. But then I looked up and saw my son sitting in the second row, arms folded, eyes fixed on me. That was all I needed. I shared my journey, the years of hiding, the silent marriage, the guilt, the moment my son caught me with that rainbow pin, and how instead of hiding, I finally chose not to run. I spoke about how coming out wasn't a single moment, but a series of choices we make over and over, to be honest, to be vulnerable, to live as we are, not as we were told to be. After the panel, a group of students came up to me. Some asked questions, others just wanted to say thank you. One girl with short pink hair and teary eyes said, "I wish my dad could hear you talk. I think he's like you. I think he's scared." I didn't know what to say, but I took her hand gently and said, "Just love him. Sometimes love is what helps us find our courage." She nodded and walked away slowly, and I stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of her words settle deep into me. That evening, my son and I sat at a small diner just off campus, greasy fries between us and the low hum of conversation around us. He was quiet for a while, then finally said, "It's weird. You're kind of becoming a role model now." I laughed, shaking my head. "A reluctant one, maybe." He smiled. Doesn't matter. People are listening to you. They're learning. I looked down at my hands, remembering how those same hands had once clenched into fists from fear. Now they were open, holding a truth that was no longer heavy, just real. He asked if I'd ever thought about dating. The question surprised me, not because I hadn't thought about it, but because I wasn't sure how to answer. Sometimes, I said slowly. But I don't want to rush into anything. I think for now, I'm just trying to figure out who I am when I'm not hiding. He nodded. That makes sense. But when you're ready, I hope you find someone who makes you feel safe. Like you don't have to perform anymore. His voice was quiet, almost shy. I looked at him, heart full. Me too, I whispered. That night, back home, I found myself standing in front of the mirror. Not adjusting my tie, not fixing my hair, just looking. Looking at the lines on my face, the gray in my beard, the years carved into my skin. And for the first time, I didn't wish any of it away. I didn't long to be younger, or different, or invisible. I just stood there and let myself be seen. By me. Later, I sat on the porch again, the night air cool and still. My son joined me without a word, both of us wrapped in blankets, the sky stretching wide above us. It's funny, he said after a while. How something that could have broken us, didn't. I nodded. Sometimes the truth shatters everything, but sometimes it rebuilds things stronger. He leaned back in his chair, eyes closed. I'm glad you didn't keep hiding. I'm glad I know who you are. His words settled in me with a warmth I hadn't felt before. I realized then that this journey wasn't just about me. It was about him too. About the kind of man he was becoming because I had finally stopped pretending. About the space we were building together, honest, open, imperfect, but real. And as we sat there under the stars, I knew there was no going back. The silence I had once lived in was gone. What remained was something far better. Truth. Connection. And the quiet, steady love between a father and son who had found each other again through everything that had once stayed unspoken. The morning light crept in slowly through the kitchen window, casting soft, golden shapes across the countertop. My son was already up, sitting at the table with a steaming mug in his hands. There was a stillness in the air, not heavy, but full, like something unspoken was about to find its voice. I poured myself a cup and joined him, both of us wordless for a while. I had grown to love these quiet moments, the ones where nothing needed to be said, because everything had already been lived. He looked up from his cup, a thoughtful expression in his eyes. You know, he said slowly, I've been thinking a lot about how different things would have been if you never told me. I met his gaze, heart steady. Yeah? He nodded. I think I would have sensed something was missing. Maybe not at first. But eventually I would have felt the gap. Like I knew you, but not all of you. His words sat between us for a moment, warm and bittersweet. I reached for his hand, and he let me take it. I think about that too, I said. About the time I lost. About what I could have shown you earlier. How to be open, how to not be afraid of your truth. He gave a small smile. You're showing me now. And honestly, I think that matters more. We sat in that softness, the silence not empty but filled with understanding, until the doorbell rang. It was a delivery, an envelope with the university's logo on it. I opened it slowly, and inside was a handwritten note from one of the students who had attended the panel. Her words were simple, but they hit like a wave. You made me feel seen. You gave me hope that I won't always have to hide. Thank you for living your truth. I read it twice, then slid the paper across the table. My son read it too, then leaned back in his chair, smiling. You're making more of a difference than you realize, he said. and for once, I believed it. Not in the grand, heroic sense, but in the quiet, human way. In the way that a voice, once hidden, becomes a light for someone else. That weekend, we recorded another podcast episode. I spoke about legacy, not the kind built with money or fame, but the kind built through honesty and presence. I talked about the people who came before us, the ones who never got to live freely, and how we owe it to them, and to ourselves, to stop living in fear. I talked about how every time we speak our truth, we loosen the grip of shame a little more. And afterward, when we finished recording, my son turned off the mic and said, "You should be proud of yourself." Pride. That word used to make me nervous. I used to think it belonged to other people, louder people, braver people, younger people. But now, it felt like it belonged to me too. Maybe not in the way the world often expects it, but in my own quiet way. In the way I stood in my kitchen and looked my son in the eye and said, "Thank you for giving me the space to become who I really am." He shook his head, almost laughing. "You did that on your own. I just didn't get in the way." That night, we went to the park for a small gathering hosted by the community center. Just a few families, candles, music, laughter. It wasn't a parade. It wasn't big. But it felt perfect. There was a moment when I stepped away from the crowd and stood under the trees, the wind brushing gently through the leaves. I looked up at the sky, thinking about the version of me who had lived so long in silence. I wanted to tell him something. That it's never too late. That your truth doesn't expire. That even after years of hiding, you can still be loved for who you are. As I stood there, my son came up beside me, his arm brushing mine. "Hey," he said softly. "You okay?" I nodded, eyes still on the stars. "I'm better than okay." He looked up too, and after a while he said, "It's weird. Most people think coming out is just one moment. But for you, it's been like unfolding. Like piece by piece." I smiled at that. "Yeah. It's not just one door you open. It's every door after that too. And every window. And every wall you thought would never fall." We didn't talk much after that. We didn't need to. The music played faintly behind us, and the candles flickered like they were breathing. I felt something close that night. Not an ending, not even a conclusion. Just a gentle landing. Like I had finally arrived at a place inside myself that had waited a long, long time to be found. And now, to anyone listening, to anyone reading, to anyone standing in front of their own truth and wondering if it's worth it, this is for you. The silence will tell you to stay hidden. The fear will whisper that it's safer to pretend. But none of that is stronger than your story. None of that is more powerful than being seen, fully, beautifully as you are. So if you've been waiting for the right time, the right moment, the right words, this is it. This is your sign. Don't wait for someone to catch you. Step forward. Speak softly if you need to. But speak. Because somewhere out there, someone needs your story to start believing in their own. And if you're already walking that path, keep going. You're not behind. You're not too late. You're just beginning. Like I did. Like so many before us. And like the ones still to come.